I sit down?
Please.
Okay. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Well, generally, over the years, you hear a lot about the battles of World War II, but never hear too much about people that helped make that possible, and the background of American people at that time. And that's what I'd like to talk about today. I was born in December, March 26, 1919, on a little four-room home in a farm in Minnesota, 7 acres. We grew raspberries, strawberries, vegetables, and my dad worked in Minneapolis as a pattern maker, took the train back and forth. Went to school in the country school, 4 rooms, 2 grades a room. And when you graduated at 8th grade, we had the service in the Congregational Church about a mile away. And then we'd have to walk 2 miles to Excelsior for our high school. At that time, I joined the Boy Scouts, and the Scoutmaster had a buzzer and a telegraph key, and taught anybody that wanted the Morse code. So I learned the Morse code from him. And then in high school, I figured someday I might be in the office, so I took a course in typing. After high school, I went to see a Civilian Conservation Corps, which was people, young guys that weren't married. They put them in camps in the North Woods and other places to do conservation work. So, growing up during the Depression, that was rough years. You had dry spells, and you had farms being closed, people walking the streets, and in the cities going to soup gardens, soup kitchens in order to get 1 meal a day. So I think that's probably one reason what made the American people at that time what they were. And in the CCs, I took a course in dynamiting, was the head dynamiter for a while. And after that, it was getting close to 1940, 40 and 41. And Roosevelt was made president in 1934, and he started his program to bring us out of the Depression, biggest depression the country ever had. And about that time, Hitler, he was coming up in Europe, building his army up and making arms. And Japan invaded Manchuria. We had a couple of cruisers over there trying to protect China, and at one time the Japs fired on our cruiser, and we fired back, but nothing happened. But we were sending scrap iron to Japan. So Roosevelt, he stopped the scrap iron in Japan and started feeding supplies to Britain. So the newspapers in New York, they had big headlines, Roosevelt's a warmonger. So that gives you that impression of what happened just before Pearl Harbor. And then in 1940, the news came out he was starting to draft. So my brother and I, we went down to the Armory in Minneapolis and joined up in 151st Field Artillery, headquarters company, and We met once a month, and then in January the 1st, we mobilized into the regular army and went to Louisiana and to Camp Claiborne. That summer, and we had what we called the maneuvers, where probably had close to 1,000 or maybe more soldiers practicing their programs, and we still had World War I equipment. We had one Browning automatic rifle for 150 men.
Share alike.
We had World War I rifles for the infantry. We had logs with sticks over them with a big sign, "This is a machine gun nest." And we had a weapons carrier like a station wagon with a sign on it, "This is a tank." I had a radio operated for our company, and it was a little square suitcase type, only good for 5 miles, operated on dry cell batteries. That was the World War I. And it didn't have a buzzer in it, so it had clicks, so it was like your telegraph at the railroad station. And we had to count the spaces between the clicks to get our dots and dashes. And then about the middle of July, we got our new radios in. They were real nice. They were good for any place in the United States. And we had a generator, the stool, the guy sit on there and crank it. And another guy operated the radio, and that had regular sound to it. So we was back in business. Then on December the 7th, Sunday, we were on the company street playing ball and radio going in one of the tents, and we heard about Pearl Harbor. And so nobody, all your leaves for Christmas and everything was canceled. And shortly after that, I was taken out of the artillery and put in a different company in headquarters and worked in the mail room. In January the 1st, I was sent to Fort Dix, and there I met up with a group of other people just like myself who was trained in communications and work in office work and things like that. And on January the 10th at midnight, secretly we were put on a railroad train and went down the docks in New York, put on a little ship, just 165 of us, plus crew. It was a World War I ship that they used for a hospital ship at that time. It was called the, I forget what it was called now. My memory isn't as good as it was. But anyway, and next morning we sailed out past the Statue of Liberty, and in the middle of a convoy going to Ireland, or not Ireland, but to Iceland. And we were escorted by 4 destroyers, 2 cruisers, and a blimp. The blimp for observation spot for subs. And on the way over, I'd say probably 5, 6 times on the way over, our destroyers would take off around this perimeter and start dropping depth bombs. And our sailors told us that we got 3 subs that they knew of. About a day and a half out of Belfast, Ireland, our convoy took off for Iceland. So there we sat out there all by ourselves and were worried. And over the waves come two little, we called them tin cans. They were British destroyers about half the size of ours. And they escorted us to Belfast. And in Belfast, when we unloaded, we boarded buses. The buses had some windows shot out. Some had cracks in the window taped up. And we were escorted to Carrickfergus. And there we were billeted in with the British unit. And so we didn't know what was going to do next, but so we just sort of sat around, and the officers figured, well, we got to have something to do to keep us out of mischief. So they was cutting the grass with shears. But the British officers, they had their own mess hall, and they had what they called batmen. And these batmen would shine their shoes in the morning, take care of the uniforms, and stand behind them at the mess hall and serve them, like waiters in a restaurant. So the American officers, we had one colonel, captain, and a lieutenant, and first sergeant. They decided it's going to be like the British, so they wanted volunteers. Well, I volunteered to be a batman for our officers. That was fine, because I had permanent pass to go to town and take care of their clothes and things like that. After a little while, we was transferred out north of Belfast to a camp of our own. And there we went to work as a liaison between the British and incoming American troops. We were the first troops out after Pearl Harbor, secretly, and it was a couple of years before news ever got out that we were there. But so all the land over there is owned. You can't take 1,000 troops and drop them into somebody's backyard. So that was what our job was liaison. In the fall of the year, we was loaded on a ship, English ship, and we sailed back across the ocean within 75 miles of New York. And there we joined an invasion convoy of Africa called Operation Torch. And so we sailed back to Africa, and I was on the ship close to 30 days, because that's how long it took us to go over and then come back again. And on the way into the Mediterranean, we start dropping troops off at different places, and finally our ship ended in Algeria, Algiers, North Africa. And we couldn't get in the dock because of all the shipping, so we had to wait our turn. We sat out there for about a day and a half. And the Germans, they'd come in off the desert, and they would come in and drop down over the city. And the city was built on a sort of a bowl around the harbor, so we couldn't shoot at them or shoot right into the city. But when they got over us and heading out towards the Mediterranean after dropping bombs, we dropped a few of them. But when a bomb dropped close to our ship, it sort of to rock the ship, and it's just like you sit inside, you have a big bass drum and somebody's beating on it. So it was sort of nerve-wracking, and our time came to dock, and most of our men went up on the hill above the town and for camping, and 10 of us stayed down to take our equipment off the ship. And every once in a while the Germans come in to bomb us, so we had to take cover, and we had just a little ways to one side there was a cement awning, and we dove under that. And till the all clear sounded, then we come out and work on loading ship again. And when they were bombing, the flak coming down was just like you were back in the U.S. Driving at night in the rain and your headlights on this, hitting that rain coming off. That's the way the flak was coming down. And then after the all clear, we'd come out and the lieutenant would line us up, start counting, and make sure we were all there. And one time, one man short, he says, Lindquist, where's Lindquist? Where's the Lindquist? And just down a few hundred feet down the dock was a great big pile of something with a big canvas tarp over it. And about the third time the Louis called, the old tarp shook and the old Lindquist come crawling out. The lieutenant says, Lindquist, don't you know that it's ammunition? And Lindquist says, that's okay, Louis, I wouldn't get wounded there. He was the jokester of our outfit. He kept morale up. He always had something to say about something. So we went up in the hill with our equipment and camped in tents in a park. And about the second or third day, we was transferred to a nunnery and billeted there. And I start working down at headquarters in Hotel St. George. And we put in our own telephone wires and our own radios, stuff like that. I worked 4 doors from Eisenhower, and I was head of about 6 radio operators, and I had a desk inside the door, and my job was to make sure the message come in, they got to the right radio operator to go to the right place. And these messages had a code on them. R was for routine. That was the last one you'd send. And P was for priority. And OP was, that went faster than the other two. But the top message was OU. And when you got a message OU, you'd take it to the operator, and if he was sending a message, he just cut the message, dropped it, and started right away on the OU. That's how important those messages were. And when they come in, I was also, my job to make sure they got issued and delivered to the right people. Now the British, they never allowed any enlisted men in their offices or their crypt rooms or radio rooms. They were all officers. So after a month, captain come in, sat down next to me, and he said, teach me what to do, so I'm taking over. So after a couple of days, he took over, and I went back to the camp, and I walked guard for a couple of days. Within a week, they sent me up in the hills where we'd taken over a French spa. And we got in the new Sagabus. That was an electric encoding machine. It was like a typewriter with discs in the back, and when you typed, the disc would move and it would do the encoding. Well, the funny part was that the Germans invented that machine. But when they took over Poland, they enslaved the Poles, and they had to work in their factories and stuff. So the Poles got a hold of parts of this machine, and they smuggled them to the French underground, who in turn smuggled them to the British, along with copies of the code books. So when the British got these, they assembled them a couple of them right away, found out they worked pretty good. Up until that time, they could never break the German code. But immediately, they start breaking the German code because they had their code books and they had their machine. And in the meantime, Rommel was being supplied by ships going across the Mediterranean from Italy. And so the orders went out to our pilots. Now, when we spot ships, you don't go direct to them. It'll give us away, and the Germans will know we got their code, that we can break their code. You start the other way and make a big circle like you're just scanning the ocean. And you on the way back to base, then you spot these ships and bomb the devil out of them. So in that way, all during the war, the Germans never knew we were breaking their code. And this was the machine that the British gave to America. And we just got them after we were in Africa. And so they had a school that I went to. And after, it was supposed to be a 10-day school, and after a couple of days, well, I got pretty good, so I started helping the instructor on it, so they sent me back to Ike's headquarters, and I went into the code room, started breaking down, setting up code for Ike. And after about a month of this, they start bringing trained officers in and taking our jobs and sending us back to the camp. So I was back at camp again for about another week, and then I was sent out to a school in Algiers and for a teletype. And teletype is to type out messages and then go over the wires like a telephone. So you had to have landline teletype wires, same as telephone. And so that was a school of about 10 or 12 days, and shortly after, and we also had a keying machine where you could key, as you type the message, they would put a series of holes in about a 1-inch wide paper tape, and each holes represented your alphabet. And the reason for this was that if you had a message coming in and it was supposed to be relayed to 6 different places, you wouldn't have to type it 6 different times. You'd just put this tape in the keying head and go out station after station after station. So I learned that in a few days, and they sent me back to Ike's headquarters. From that time on, the rest of the war, I was a teletype operator. Got to think of what comes next. So I believe there isn't too much left to tell. So I would say about the middle of 1944, they start sending soldiers home to the States that they'd got so many points for being overseas for so long, and they send them back on what they called rotation, where you'd go back to the States and spend a couple of weeks resting up, and then they'd send you out to another place, maybe to Japan or rather the Pacific, or back to your old place. And one of our men went back on rotation, and he was, after a couple of weeks, he was sent to the Pacific. And he wrote me a letter and told me about it, so they told me, well, you got plenty of points. We're going to send you home in rotation. I said, no, you aren't. I come out and started at the beginning of this, and I'm going to stay to the end of it. So I wouldn't go home. So and then in spring of 1945, they says, Walt, you're holding up things. So why don't you go home? I said, because I'm going to stay till the end. And they said, well, we got a new deal. It's called TD, temporary duty. We send you home, and you can't go out of the States again unless you go back to your old outfit. And I said, well, okay, I'll take that. So they put me on a plane and sent me to Italy. And I was there in their headquarters for a while, and then we loaded on a ship. The Miss America was the biggest liner for passengers that we ever built. It was so fast that it traveled without escort. It was faster than Queen Elizabeth. The Queen Elizabeth and the QE2 both, they crossed the ocean in 5 days. Well, this ship here was so big that I don't know how many thousand men we had on it, but we left on Monday around noon, and we went down around Italy, around the point up into the heel. We picked up a complete bomb group, sailed back through the Mediterranean, and halfway across the Atlantic, our ship's radio got word that Germany had surrendered. And we landed in Portsmouth, Virginia on Friday at noon. Now that's pretty fast. We traveled a lot further than Queen Elizabeth did in the same amount of time. So when we landed, they sent us to a camp, and we could order anything to eat we wanted. I think all of us ordered milk. We hadn't had milk since we left the States. And steak. We had that. And the next day after that, they put us on the railroad train, and we were all shipped to our homes, different destinations. And I got to Minneapolis and took a bus. Well, first, we went to Fort Snelling. Ended up, and there we was mustered out. And it came time for me to be mustered out, and the lieutenant, he'd been overseas with me in Ike's headquarters, so he knew me, and he says, I can't let you out. I said, why? He says, well, with your classification, we're keeping them in. We've got to have you yet. And I said, no, you don't. I said, I'm going home. I've been in long enough, 40 months overseas. I said, that's enough. And I said, if I go home, you'll have to send NPs after me. You won't get no work out of me. So the lieutenant says, well, I can send you home by changing your papers. He says, I'll take off what you do and just put you down as a regular enlisted man, then I can send you home. I says, okay. So I got my discharge, got on a bus and went out to Excelsior. Still, I didn't know I was home. I mean, that sort of in a fog. I walked into Bill's cafe, and Bill says, there's Walt. Set up the biggest beer in the house. And he had a glass. It held about 2 regular glasses of beer. And he set it down, and I grabbed a hold of it. And then I started to shake. For the first time, I realized I was old. And that's the end of my speech. Is any questions? And I'll try to answer them.
Did you drink the beer? Did you drink the beer?
Oh, yes, I drank it.
Yes.
It was good. We didn't have any American beer overseas. In Ireland, we had Scotch whiskey and Guinness. So I learned how to drink Scotch and learned how to drink Guinness. In Africa, we had wine, or you had African beer, which was horrible because it was warm. They didn't have any high refrigeration for beer. One place I've come across we did though, and that's out at Bufarique. We had we had our airplanes out there, and I walked a little cafe and sat down, and along the backboard was a great big backboard, holes in it. And I asked what that was, and he says, well, that's where we put our beer. He says, that's a cooler made in the United States. So that's the only cold beer I got all the time I was in Africa.
What are the photos?
So let me just go through them real quick.
So most of them are just from, so this one here is, so Walt, you want to talk about that one real
Yeah,
quick?
see it. That's some of your cards that you made when you.
Oh,
to send
yeah.
home.
When I was in Ike's headquarters, and for Christmas and other places, there's no way we could buy cards to send home or anything, so I made my own, and the officers wanted them, so I duplicated them, gave some to all the officers. So I had to make about 50, 60 cards every time I made one to send home. So I made Christmas cards and cards for different occasions, like Easter and so forth.
Wow, that's great. Looks like a letter to Mom and Dad when you were there, to your parents, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah, they had, I can't think of the name of that again. My mind is going. But it was a form that they gave you, and you would write your letter on that form, and they would photograph it. So the small photograph film would have probably 100, 200 letters on it, and then they could ship it by airplane back to the States. When they got back to the States, then they would take and print it out and send it to your parents.
Wow. Oh, this is cool. Father's Day.
That's your Father's Day one.
Pardon?
Your Father's Day went to your dad. This is cool.
I can't see what it is.
That's the
My
Father's-
eyes are pretty bad.
That's the Father's Day one that you sent to Dad.
Oh, yeah. I think that one there, one of the other fellows made that.
And this email, this must have been a special
Female.
type email.
Yeah, email, that's what I'm talking about. They photographed it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
pretty neat.
Pretty good artist.
Yeah, you're a great artist. And this just looks like some more military
Those are the passes.
passes. Yeah.
Oh. Yeah. That's Allied Force headquarters. And I had a permanent pass, so I could go and come as I wanted to with that pass. And then when it got to Italy, I was in the headquarters there. They gave me another pass similar to that for there.
And then some of these other pictures I'd already put into the handout. This one, the mosque picture.
Oh yes.
And then some of them I didn't, of course, but I just showed some of these a minute ago. This one's in the handout.
Yeah. Well, that mosque picture that showed how narrow the streets were in
No,
old
go ahead. Well,
at Old Town. We weren't allowed to go up there, but I sneaked up anyway. But the streets were so narrow that the balconies would come together. You could step from one balcony across the other balcony across the street. That's how narrow the streets were. And of course, there were steps to go up and down. No vehicles, wheeled vehicles, ever went there. It was back in the days before that, I guess, because they just used horses.
and this is a much better picture of the military ID than the one in the handout, of course.
Oh, yeah,
Passport.
Oh, passport?
yeah,
Oh, okay.
Yeah, passport. I guess that latter part of the war, I don't think they used passports, but being that we were the first troops out and going over, we had to have passports. And how did we leave camp to go to town or something? Well, you'd have to have a passport. But now my two brothers who was World War II with me, they never had passports because that was later on. They went over in about 43.
Did I understand you right? Well, you had to have, the first troops had to have passports to get into getting able and so on.
Yeah, you had to do, the first troops had to have passports, right?
Right.
Well, that's interesting.
Had to go through immigration, I guess.
Well, I don't think the troops had them. It's just our 165 people, because we went over so secret. Nobody knew that we were there until practically, I mean, nobody's supposed to know we went over.
So were you in uniform?
Oh, yes.
And then and of course, this map is the Operation Torch map that's in the handout as well. And of the 3 different landing zones for the troops that landed on the North African coast during that operation.
That's what it says in here. What army was he in?
I would like to mention, though, that the people back in the States, they worked their tails off, and they were just as important in winning that war as us people that went overseas. Because without them working 10 hours a day, 6 days a week, we wouldn't have got what we needed over there to fight. So we were one big unit, and that's probably one of the reasons why we won that war.
And
The conveyor, Frank? The conveyor?
Oh, yeah, Casablanca when we landed on the road.
and then these were, and then these couple pictures here are just some patches that Walt and the family provided, of patches that he had during the time he was there. And then these are his rank patches that he wore in his uniform. These are not, of course, in the handout, but there's his extra patches, pictures of patches that he wore on his uniform. And of course, those are the theater patches all of us are familiar with that we would have had depending on the conflict era and the theater that we were in at the time.
How do you get the stripe?
This one?
One on the right there.
The one on the right,
Yes.
that was a hash mark on the sleeve up here, and that was for every 6 months in the service.
6 years.
6 years. The other one was 6 months. The one you had that had all
Oh.
the bars on it.
Right
That
here?
one, yeah. Each one
Yeah,
is
the
6 months.
horizontal ones are 6 months per bar.
And the other one is for how long?
6 years.
6 years.
Come to, I think I got that wrong. Memory's coming back. The hash mark, I think, was for your 3 years of service, and for every 6 months they had little gold bars they put on the sleeve down here.
No, and that's correct.
And I had 6 of those.
Yeah, that's correct.
Every 6 months you'd get a gold bar.
And that would be correct, because that would be 3 years. That's right.
Memory.
You're doing great.
Okey-doke.
Well, what did you do after you got out of the service?
Pardon?
What did you do when you got out of the service?
I went fishing for a while. And the people getting out of service at that time, until they found a job, they could go down once a month and get $20 from the government. And I never went down and got any because I went looking for a job. And I got one right away and went to work after I come back from fishing. I had 2 or 3 jobs, and at that time, they didn't have any laws or anything like they got now, discrimination laws. So I went down to Western Union, and Western Union wanted me, but they was only going to give me $24 a month, or $24 a week, and no raises or anything for I don't know how long. And I said, no way. And I went to a telephone company. And because I worked on some of the landline telephone while I was overseas, they said they'd hire me too. And so I made the application out. They said, good, come in Monday morning and be ready to go. We'll send you to Kansas City to school for a while to learn how to put in switchboards. And you'll be going from place to place, and when your the number comes up that you'd be next in line, then you'd stay at that town until you retired if you wanted. And so I was going out the door, and he said, hey, wait a minute, one question we forgot. How old are you? I said, 26. Sorry, can't hire you. 25 is our limit. And so after that, I went to work for a printing company in Midway between St. Paul and Minneapolis. And so I agreed to go to work for them on a printing press, offset press. It's fairly new at those days. And at 65 cents an hour. So I got my first week's pay, 50 cents an hour. I said, what's the deal? They said, well, these kids, high school kids, been working here for 50 cents an hour all these years, and you come in here, we can't give you 65 cents an hour. And I said, goodbye. They says, you can't quit. You're froze. There's a law that you can't quit. We can freeze you. And I says, no, you can't. I said, I'm going uptown to get a cup of coffee. When I come back, you have that last check ready for me. And so I came back, they had the check ready for me, and I walked out. They said, well, we got all these papers to get out today. How do we get them out? I says, that's your worry. But that's the way they were treating soldiers at that time, coming out of the service.
So what did you do as a career?
I worked in a factory making equipment, grain cleaning equipment, and then from there we changed over to farm equipment. I worked for them 27 years, and then quit and went to work for another company in Mankato as an engineer, designing equipment for them, generally cabs for tractors, and with radio and air conditioning and everything in them. And I worked there 5 years, and my daughter and my son had graduated, and they moved out here to Denver. So every year I'd come out to see them. My son-in-law says, why don't you move out? And I said, when I find a job. So he says, well, I work for the telephone company. He said, won't cost you nothing to call back. He says, find a job. He says, call back, put your house up. So I went around and I had 3 different offers as an engineer. And I chose one in Inglewood, and with a factory making equipment for air, like air dryers where you dry the water out of air so it wouldn't rust your equipment. And also we made air regulators and air filters. So I went to work for them as an engineer, and I worked there 10 years and finally retired at 70.
Did you take advantage of the GI Bill?
Pardon?
Did you take advantage of the GI Bill?
I started to take advantage of it, but the job that I had was assistant shipping manager and receiving manager for Young Quinlan Company in Minneapolis. And I had a GI Bill on that to where I would learn the business after a couple of years, and then they'd have to give me full pay, and in the meantime they gave me part of the pay to make up the difference. That was part of the GI Bill. And I worked for them for probably about a year, and then I quit to go to work in the factory because that was more money.
Wow.
And my first house I bought on the GI Bill also.
Any more questions?
Good job, Walt. Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm just happy I made it.
Thank you, guys. And I'd like to present to Walt one of our Museum Challenge coins for his great talk today. And thank you all very much for coming out today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Walt. Thank you very much.
You bet.
Thanks. All right. Thank you.
I think you'll want this back.
Yeah, I will take that.